Hello world, this is Hello Chaos, the podcast about the ups and downs, ins and outs, highlights and low points of entrepreneurship. And we just talk to all kinds of entrepreneurs to find out, getting their stories and see what insights we can take from their experiences. I am your co-host, Jennifer Oladipo.
It's okay. Just keep going. That's what we're doing. We're just rolling.
I am your co-host, Jennifer Oladipo, a.k.a. Jenno.
And I am your co-host, Jennifer Sutton, a.k.a. JJ.
See, I was thinking about your nickname.
Yeah.
And I messed up my own name.
And which you can find me on Twitter, JJ Media Maven. All my friends and family call me.
Claimed it.
JJ. But on today's show, so excited, we've got Richard Bliss with BlissPoint.
Hi, Richard.
Richard, how are you?
Hi. I'm doing great. What a pleasure to be here. This is awesome.
It's a pleasure to have you.
That's right. Yeah, the two Jens. You were like, who am I talking to?
Yeah.
Is this
So yeah,
well,
it's the Jen show.
I had a sister named Jennifer, and I had a cat named Jennifer, so it should not be hard.
A cat named Jennifer.
All the best females and felines are named Jennifer.
That's right.
It's a fact. So I am so glad. We'll talk about that another time. But I'm really glad to have you on because you are just somebody we could have talked about so many different things.
Yeah.
But if you could just get us started, tell us a little bit about what you're doing today with BlissPoint, and then we'll get into some other stuff.
Sure, not a problem. Thanks for having me. BlissPoint is a consulting firm here in Silicon Valley. I work primarily with executives, leaders of large corporations, as well as individuals who are looking to increase their presence and their voice online, and specifically mostly around LinkedIn. So I work with the sales teams, I work with the executives, and helping them understand what I refer to as this digital first world, finding a way to have their presence be recognized online long before anybody meets them in person.
How did you get into it? What was that moment?
There's a long story, but there's a short story. I've been an executive in technology for many years, but a couple of years ago, it's been a few, over a decade ago, I was the vice president of marketing for a company that fired me and gave my job to my wife, now ex-wife.
What?
Her name wasn't Jennifer, so let's just be clear. Her name was not Jennifer. It was awkward. And because they had contracted out our company, and so I couldn't. I was stuck. I was the face of the industry, my industry. I was traveling the world, and suddenly I was thrust into a situation where I needed to reinvent myself, and so I had to pivot, and I had to find a way to build up a presence. So I wrote a book at the time, this was 2011, taught myself how to do social media, Twitter. Instagram wasn't really around then. Facebook a little bit, but mostly LinkedIn and Twitter. And I launched a podcast. That podcast ran for 10 years, was very successful, the #1 podcast in its category, and kind of reinvented myself. Then I got the attention of some tech companies here in Silicon Valley who asked me to come in and do this for their executives, what I had been doing for myself as I pivoted. So that's kind of, in a short, condensed form, how I kind of get started in doing this.
There's so much there.
I know.
Oh my gosh. And there's so much there. So we have a lot of fun talking about it.
What was your podcast name?
Funding the Dream. The podcast has been running for 10 years because back in 2011, no one knew or understood the power of something called Kickstarter. Now, I know that the two of you have probably heard of Kickstarter, but in 2011, very few people have heard of the concept of crowdfunding. They knew it a little bit, but Kickstarter was just emerging. And I discovered that there was an entire subset of Kickstarter people who were in a capitally restricted industry, and that Kickstarter was going to make a fantastic, incredible impact on their industry. So I got out in front of that industry, started talking to those people in that industry, explaining to them how Kickstarter could help them fund their dream. Do you want to take a guess? Jennifer might know, but Jenno might know, but Jennifer, JJ, you might want to take a guess. You want to guess what the largest funding category is on Kickstarter?
The largest funding
category. A category that raises more money than almost all the other ones combined. We got some options.
Yeah, give me
literature,
like
publishing. I would say
like-
maybe publishing or
publishing,
I was thinking like textile or clothing,
technology,
fashion.
or clothing,
yeah.
fashion, dance,
Yeah.
music, books, literature. Yeah, we would think all of these. It's board games.
What?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Wow.
So this is the other thing about Richard that I think I knew and worked with you for a couple of years
what?
before I knew that he's like the board game king of
So wait a minute.
America.
So the largest funding category is literally people
More
trying to get more money is going to like somebody wants to create the new Monopoly or the
That
new
is
Yes,
Scrabble.
but it's not Yeah, but it's not Monopoly and Scrabble. These are
What?
so there are 500 new board games on Kickstarter every 30 days.
What?
No way. What?
Yes, 500 new Kickstarter board games every 30 days. And they raise go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I was
ahead,
just going to say,
Jenno.
we need you, before I forget, like, we need you to connect us with some board game magnates or whatever, like, to get
Because
on
I'm
the
like
show.
I'm
There's
a
a
huge
ton- You are in the
board
hotbed
games.
of the board game world. Greenville, South Carolina is the hotbed
What?
of some of the most influential people in the board game industry.
It's crazy. I know.
Do you know? Did you know this?
Yeah, because the friend who I know him through, I found out that they just had this, like, whole,
Well, what?
they
So
were
na-
like the board game.
So what's like
czars.
a up and coming or like nouveau
Okay,
board
so
game?
here we go. So your
Okay,
audience is probably
so-
going to hear. So there's college kids. So it depends on the age group. But
Yeah.
for example, most everybody has heard of
Fascinating.
Cards Against Humanity. Cards
Yeah.
Against Humanity.
Yeah, yeah.
Anybody- Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a Kickstarter game back in 2012, and they raised $2,000 on Kickstarter.
Oh my god.
And that was
Big money.
created by Max and Max has been on my podcast. Max, who's the creator with his buddies in Chicago, they created the game. Now they sell 200,000 copies of that every year by far.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's some of the hottest selling. So there you go. There's one. Now that's for most college kids and everything. Settlers of Catan or Catan.
I've played that.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
Okay. That's a board game. Now it wasn't on Kickstarter, but it is one of the board games out there that sells, 1 million copies a year of that board game. Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is the number one selling board game out there right now. It is a $180 board game. The box weighs 22 pounds.
What?
The
Is it-
creator of this game was a physicist, a PhD in physics. I had him on my podcast. His name's Isaac Childress, and I asked Isaac the day before his Kickstarter went live. I said, "What does your wife think about you sitting at home making board games with a PhD in physics?" She was a nurse paying all the bills. He says, "Well, she's not quite sure. She's kind of waiting to see what happened." Okay, his Kickstarter went live that afternoon. 30 days later, when the Kickstarter stopped, I got on the phone with him and had him back on the show. And I said, "Okay, Isaac, what does your wife think now?" Because in those 30 days, $4 million dropped into his bank account in 30 days. The game continues to sell hundreds of thousands of copies a year at $180. So there is it. So, I mean, we're way off topic, but the
I know.
point here was,
so fascinating.
well, there's all, and it just keeps going, and it just keeps going, and it just keeps
Oh
going.
my
So what I
gosh.
did is I discovered that the board game industry is incredibly capital intensive. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
money to make all that art, all the
Oh, yeah.
rights, the board, the physical components, all of that. And Kickstarter was a way to shift the risk or the capital outlay from the creator who was making a bet to the fans who are willing
Mhm.
to go in with them. Hey, I'll toss you $20. I'll toss you $50 because that looks like a cool game.
Mhm.
Well, so what I did is my Twitter account went up to about 25,000 followers, the Game Whisperer. I
Ah.
did my podcast called Funding the Dream on Kickstarter, and it was around board game, mostly helping board gamers understand the business of board gaming, the business of manufacturing, the business of marketing. And Twitter, Facebook, podcasting, all of that. I started traveling the country, being asked to guest speak at conferences. There are usually about 10 board game conventions every weekend somewhere in the United States. 500 board game
What?
conventions a year,
Oh
52.
my goodness.
Last week, I was in Columbus, Ohio. I was there speaking. I was brought in to speak to a business conference. It was attached to the convention center. By coincidence, it was the second largest board game convention in the country with 14,000 people in attendance. I walked across the street after giving my presentation, and I'm a bit of a celebrity. And so I was
like kind of a big deal.
You're like the board whispers here.
People came running up. One guy hugged me, screaming at the top of his lungs and said, "You changed my life." He says, "You changed my life. I can't believe I have the opportunity of meeting you. You changed my life."
Oh.
So as I was standing on the street corner in downtown Columbus, talking to my business colleagues, and hundreds of people are walking by, right? It's downtown Columbus. And I'm kind of trying to explain to them that, yes, I'm here for their convention, but this convention across the street, I'm kind of a celebrity. And they're trying to wrap their head around it. So I grab somebody off the street and I pull them. I say, "Hey, Tony," because I recognized. I said, "Tony, come here." So we're standing on the street corner. These women are like, he just grabbed somebody off the street. I said, "Tony, how long have you known me?" He says, "I met you yesterday." I said, "How long have you followed me on social media?" He said, "I followed you for about 12 years.
Wow.
Yes. I said, "Tony, would you please explain to these women that I'm kind of famous?" And he went on to explain. So sorry to sidetrack this entire conversation, but
This is awesome.
But here's my point to draw this back. I did this because I needed to reinvent myself for business. Now, I never monetized any of that. I didn't make any money off my podcast. I didn't run any ads. I really didn't do any of that because I was trying to use a safe space to reinvent myself where I could learn and make mistakes without having a long-term impact on the direction I wanted to go with my business and my own career. So the board games became, so for some people it's scrapbooking. For some people it might be, videos or whatever it might be. But my advice was, this is what I did, is learn to master the tools in a safe environment and now go have some fun. And then when the time's ready, you'll make that transition crossover. So how'd I do? Did I do a good segue to bring us back on topic?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what were some of the, and by the way, for those who can't see or hear, Richard's got like this beautiful backyard office space, and those are crows that we're hearing in the background. So we don't have a laugh track or anything like that going on.
If I had the camera, I would just turn it around and the crow's sitting right here looking at me right outside my
He's waiting for the peanuts.
He's like,
where are the
waiting
peanuts?
for the peanuts. Yes.
But so what were some of the things that you were able to experiment with and learn during that period? And then how did you take those? What was the next phase that you took those to?
So for example, social media. I learned how to use Twitter. That Twitter is an ongoing, all the time conversation. A lot of board gamers use Twitter to talk to each other. It was a great place to share wisdom and advice, talk about the podcast, my guests. Twitter is a very present platform, right? You don't go to Twitter once a week. You're looking at it. I just did a post today where somebody asked about using social media in events. I said, Twitter's the perfect social media tool at events. As you're listening to your session or your keynote speaker, or even if somebody was listening right now, they would be using Twitter to say, "Oh, Richard just dropped a truth bomb. Oh, hey, the speaker just said this." And it's a great way to stay current.
Yeah.
TikTok today is a great way to go around if you're at an event, taking those videos, little updates. What I learned is that each social media platform has its role. LinkedIn was the tough one because I didn't quite understand it at the time, had to figure it out. But I also wanted to experiment. So I published a book. I self-published a book. I used lulu.com and they do self-print on demand. I edited it myself. That is not a good idea. Speaking of Jennifer, right now, not a good idea because it's got spelling errors on the back cover. I'm just like, oh man, I can't fix that one. So I published the book, the podcast, learning how to talk to an audience, be part of a community, give to the community. And then on LinkedIn, how to build those relationships and not just connect randomly with everybody, right? But to find the way to connect and then add value to that community. One of the things I developed over that time was to realize that for most people, they use crowdfunding because they think they have a funding problem. And this applies to a lot of our business things. Oh, I need more money. I don't have the money. I'm going to go on crowdfunding. You don't have a funding problem. You have a crowd problem. Solve for the crowd and the funding will follow. And that's really what I learned was building up a community of followers where you gave and gave and gave. And then when the time came for you to ask, the audience, the crowd, the community wants to give back because you've given so much. And that's really what I learned. By the way, the publishing the book, though, led directly to a Silicon Valley mega corporation, $6 billion, reaching out to me, asking if I would come and support their executives, their vice chairman.
So that was the trigger. That was the catalyst to
I got
that.
noticed. Huh. I didn't do it for that reason, but a corporation saw what I was doing. One person knew me, called me in to see if I could support. The gentleman's name is Tom Mendoza. If anybody's familiar with the University of Notre Dame, their business school is called the Mendoza School of Business. It's the same guy. And I taught him everything I had learned because he wanted to learn how to be active on social media. So yes, by experimenting, putting myself out there, all of a sudden the opportunity and doors began to open for me. And I didn't really struggle with trying to monetize all of that activity. It was more, I felt like I was just teaching myself. And if somebody ultimately found me, which they did, I was able to make that pivot and now continue to grow the business to where it is today.
Yeah. So what was the that also moment where, okay, so you get into this large corporation and they're like, okay, teach us, oh wise one, Mr. Richard, what to do. When did it turn into like, oh, this is a business, like this is my path, this is my journey?
Yeah, when I got hired, they were only paying me $800 a month.
Oh, wow.
Literally $800. It was a blog a month. Could you put on Forbes? I was writing for Forbes, but could you do a blog a month? My ex-wife now, the one who had my job, she wasn't happy. But I kept trying to tell her, look, this is an opportunity to step into a whole nother world. And they brought me on board as a full-time employee ultimately. And then I'm doing general counsel. I'm doing the chief revenue officer. I'm doing the chief marketing officer. I'm helping all of them with their social. Then the salespeople are being pulled in. Then the CEO of another company recruited me to come to his company to do the same thing as an employee. And then just over 3.5 years ago, I left that company. And now suddenly I'm kind of in between. And both Mr. Mendoza and the CEO who had recruited me came to me and said, Richard, what you're doing is so incredibly valuable. You need to do it on your own. I had never, I had kind of done it on my own, but had never really just stepped out and like, I'm going to try something. This was a big leap. Now I had just gotten married. My wife had a good job and she said, look, I can cover the expenses. I can cover the insurance. This is your opportunity. Go do it. And that's when, with the support of some individuals who said, we're here to support you. And they continue now. It's been 3.5 years. They continue to give me references and support and confidence. And that's when a client stepped up and said, we'll be your first client. And I was like, okay, how much do I charge you?
So I hope it's more than $800 a month.
It wasn't much more than $800 a month. It was $1,500. Was it $1,000 or $1,500 a month? Is what they were willing to pay me. I was like, dang. But my wife and my new bride was so generous. She said, look, I'll give you 2 years. Oh. And halfway through that year, by a shock to me, LinkedIn came out with their top 10 most influential salespeople, their top voices on the platform in whatever, a couple of years ago. And I was number 8.
Wow.
Total shock. I thought it was a scam. When the guy reached out to me, I was like, I don't think you're right. I had to go look him up on LinkedIn and email him through LinkedIn and say, is this legit? And yes. And that then caused a lot of people to pay attention. And suddenly by year 2, I was now making 10 times that much. And by year 3, that had grown to almost like 4 times. No, 20 times, 30 times more than that.
Okay. So you had already, had this mindset of like reinvention and everything. So did you like immediately accept it when someone was like, hey, time for you to go out to business on your own? Or did you resist it?
Were you still job hunting?
Yeah.
Once I made the commitment, no, I wasn't job hunting. It was all in. And I sat down with some advisors, some friends, a couple of them I just mentioned, but a few others that were here local in the Bay Area. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. What does this need to look like to be successful? Well, you need to write a book. Okay, this time a real book, a legit book. And I did, and it was published last year. And I reached out to all of these executives and I pulled the stories in. And it's called Digital First Leadership, and it's helping these executives. So that was number one. Number two, I probably need to have a podcast. So I did. I started that process to have it's a very small podcast focused on my clientele.
And why?
You know, and
Real quick, Richard. Why a podcast?
Why
Why'd you need one?
podcast? Yeah.
Because that was one of the things I learned about community, is that podcasting. So I stopped podcasting. I stopped my other podcast right about when everybody else started up theirs, right? Mine had run for 10 years, hundreds of thousands of downloads, and suddenly I just walked away. And it was like, oh, if I want to build a community over time, because it ran for 10 years, I need to have a chance to put value into the community. And podcasting is a great way to give to your community. For example, I told you that when I was walking that show floor of 14,000 people, one board game owner ran up to me. He owns a company, and the one who hugged me. And he says, "You changed my life." Well, how did I change his life? Well, for years, he was in the construction business and he wanted to get out of it. So what he did is he started researching and looking around, listening to podcasts. And so he put my voice in his ear. He then got sick, couldn't work, and decided to invent a board game. Raised his last Kickstarter raised $750,000. Trey Parker.
Yeah. South Park. Yeah.
Named his board game number one on his list of best board games that he's ever played.
Wow.
So his company, but he ran over to me and did all the whole fanboy, because for 10 years of my content was in his ear. And here's what was funny. As I looked at him, because I've kind of had this happen before. And he's kind of like, I can see he's just kind of dealing with it. I said, it's kind of surreal, isn't it, to hear my voice in person? He's like, yeah. Can we record it? And I said, sure. So he held up his phone and I did. And I said, welcome to the show. I'm Richard Bliss, your host, and you're listening to Funding the Dream on Kickstarter. My guest today is Connor. Connor, thanks for joining me. And then he almost teared up. It was, so my point was, though, podcasting is an incredibly intimate way of connecting with our audience. And why was I willing to? I spent the evening that night with him at a restaurant talking, giving, because I said, look, you just spent 10 years of my life in your ear. The most I can do is give something back to you now that we've met in person. And so being generous to this audience who hears you, connects with you, feels you, appreciates you, that's what a podcast can do in no other way. And that's why I realized, for me to connect with this audience, I needed to have that podcast. That was a really, really long answer to a really short one.
It's good. It's a good one, and I'm all in. I'm a podcast.
And so what is that podcast name?
That podcast is Digital First Leadership.
The Digital First. So it's after the book. Okay.
Okay. So thank you. So your third. So the podcast was the second thing. The first was the book. Second was the podcast, and then
the third thing was social media. On the whole getting out there and being social media and finding something to be an expert on. And up until this point, I kind of had been just teaching and kind of just coaching, but it's like, no, I now need to be an expert on something. And so I started looking around at the other experts in the space, and LinkedIn was obviously where I needed to be because that's what I was teaching. LinkedIn had recognized my contribution. And so finding something to be an expert on and then pushing all my eggs into one basket to push through to that was the third thing that I did. And so, now I sponsor the largest LinkedIn algorithm report every year that helps people understand. I do keynote speaking. I was at the National Speakers Association in Orlando this year doing their closing keynote, all helping people understand this one thing that I mastered and learned so that I could teach it to others.
Yeah, it's. I just want to say it is like so worth following Richard on LinkedIn because you give away so much for free, so much, and it's like like how I was, talking
the algorithm that we were talking about.
Right, when I was like getting folks to engage within this certain window. Like every LinkedIn thing you hear from me, I learned from Richard. Yeah,
it's from BlissPoint.
Yeah, because mine was like an online resume before. It's I'm still working on it.
And you're not alone. Most people think of LinkedIn that way. And so that's the change that I help people make. And I'd like to say, I do give away almost everything. There is very little that is not given away in my podcast, in my book, in my speaking, my guest. I will share. And the reason is because the reason I get paid is not because I'm going to show them something they don't know. Well, most of them don't know, but it's because I'm going to bring it all together. Most of them don't pay attention.
Yeah.
But I give it away because for some people, that's all they need to take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to monetize that. Just to give them one piece, it's just a knowledge transfer. And that they can go find it, but I'm just going to make it easier for them. What people pay me for and what corporations pay me for is to come in and get their people to make that change. Not just to tell them what needs to be done, but actually to get them to make that change and start doing it. Activate it. And that's what I am. And I'm an activator. That's why I give away as much knowledge as people can consume from me.
Well, I love what you're saying. And Richard, one of the things that really hit home that we've heard from other entrepreneurs and it's things that, we've talked about too, is you said it around the crowdfunding of, you don't have a funding problem, you have a crowd problem.
Yeah.
If you focus on an audience and give to that audience and you cater to them and serve them with good content and building that community, the funding will come.
Yeah.
Just like you are a master, you have mastered LinkedIn and people pay you, the funding, people are paying you to activate that. And I think that's just something that we heard from another entrepreneur that said, he actually coaches people to go, you might want to just sell that idea because you don't have
You're
the
person to execute.
the personality to be able to or the fortitude to be able to start a company and build that because you're too focused in the tech,
the technology of it, or whatever the weeds
the weeds are.
Yeah.
So, I think those are great lessons that those are themes that we keep hearing.
Yeah. So it also sounds like, every step of your reinvention, you're producing something, right? So it's not just, okay, I'm going to make this move and sort of let people know about it, put it out there. But you keep creating something, whether it's the podcast or the
Another book
or, you're speaking and stuff like that. So what is that just like your impulse? Like, are you just like that kind of a person, or what are the calculations that you've made to know that like creation has to be a part of my reinvention?
I don't know if I'd ever thought about it that way. That it just is part of. I've been doing this a very long time. There's a good friend of mine, Robbie Fitzwater, who lives in Greenville, teaches over at Clemson marketing. And he and I have a mutual friend named Mark Schaefer. Mark Schaefer wrote a book called Known. He's a very well author. And Robbie paid a compliment when Mark asked him about me. And he says, well, Richard's reinvented himself more than anybody I know. I've just given you one example here, the one transition, because it's happened multiple times. But Jennifer, to answer your question, partly is a strength that I draw upon. I come from a very diverse background of my upbringing, allowing me to see and connect things in the world. But really it comes down to, I struggle if I get in front of someone and I haven't been able to give value, true value, not just advice. I mean, I can give advice. I got 5 daughters. I give advice all day long. Do they listen to me? Yeah, that's debatable. I also have 2 ex-wives, so I've been working on giving that advice type thing. So I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it. Okay. But the point here is that giving value, and so it's really hard. I got to tell you, I sometimes sit in on people's webinars or seminars type thing, and I listen to them do 20 minutes of introduction, 10 minutes of content, and 20 minutes of pitching to the upsell, and I come away thinking, is this the bar that is so low that people aren't willing to give true value? And so, Jennifer, to answer the question, yeah, I guess I don't feel of worth unless I have given something of myself of worth, whether it's my knowledge through a podcast, it's a book, it's my blogging, my writing, my speaking, whatever it is that I can give or create. It's so that people can walk away with something and say, wow, or you changed my life. And I got to tell you, there's nothing more emotionally powerful than to have a total stranger come up to you and say something to that effect that shocks you, that because you had no idea.
Yeah.
And yet it happens.
Oh man, Richard, something's going on with your camera. Like I just hate to cut off it to pause this like awesome conversation, but you got really fuzzy. I'm wondering if it's like your internet connection or something, because you're like really pixelated, and then there was like a slight delay.
All right.
Are you seeing that, Nicole?
Or is it just us?
You see it too. Okay. I don't think it's here.
No, let me take a quick look here. Hang on. Let me just see if I can fix it. You know what? Let's switch to a different camera. It won't be nearly as pretty.
A different angle.
Oh, it'll be just as beautiful with your face there.
No, trust me. It's not.
He's just
not
like
really.
saying, "Oh yeah, it's the camera."
Yeah. That's better.
Yeah,
we might see some crows.
I know.
No,
You've
what
got,
you're
like,
see is
you've
all the
got your,
trash
like-
on the floor.
Oh, you got like your active background.
Throw some peanuts back there.
Okay. All right. So we are back. If you are watching the podcast versus listening, you will see that Richard's had a whole wardrobe change in the background there. Today has been like technical difficulties
change.
day. That's right. Set change. But yeah, like what you were saying, you were just talking about like the power of
serving.
Of serving. It really is. It's a serving mentality. It gives you a chance of giving back. It has permeated a lot of who I am. I lived in South America for a while. I lived in Asia for a while when I was a young man in my early 20s. And in both places, well, in South America and in Asia, I was in Taiwan. They both asked me at a time about serving my country, because for them, it was mandatory military service. And so they're about my age. I'm meeting some of these young men, and they're like asking me in the United States. And I got to tell you, that affected me, because I realized that, my country didn't ask me to serve, right? I didn't have to do anything. I got freedom. And so when I came back, I signed up. And I joined the military for 15 years, artillery, because I realized that I needed to find a way to give back. Now, do I recommend other people do it? No. It is not a pleasant experience. And this was a window of time that the Berlin Wall had came down during that time period. Desert Storm popped up, but it was But the point here is that this concept of serving, whether you serve the country through the military, you serve as an elected official in some capacity, you serve on a committee or a volunteer, and there are so many ways to give. And if I was going to give any advice to your audience, and that is, Wasp just flew in, so I might panic and say, he's got my attention. If there's any way for you to give back to your community, the community will ultimately reward you, not in monetary ways, but in emotion, in impact, or like I just said, having somebody just ultimately change their life that not have happened if you hadn't come along. So giving that service is, I guess, Jennifer, you've identified as something that I just hadn't thought about it quite that way, but you're right.
Very cool.
Oh, this has been great.
I know. We're right at the end of our
out of our time
together. So
but I think I need to have some BlissPoint in my life.
I know,
Obviously, you
right?
looked at my LinkedIn. You were like, "Yeah, you need to change that."
There's small things. I'm also looking at your Twitter account too. But yeah, it's,
yeah.
All right.
I am all about advice and somebody telling me what to do, because I'm making it up as we go along. So.
Would you like me to give you one more piece of advice on how to win at Monopoly?
Please.
One, don't play. But the other piece of advice is this: Monopoly, sometimes we forget the elements of the game, and the concept is scarcity and monopolies, but not the way we think. So to win at Monopoly, we need to two things: buy two properties, the light blues, Oriental, Connecticut, I can't remember the third one, Vermont, and buy the tans, New York, St. James Place, and Tennessee, right? Why? And then fill them with houses as fast as you can and max out the houses, 4 houses, and then stop. There's nothing else you need to do. Here's why. The scarcity in the game, we all think about it being the properties on the board. That is not the scarcity. The true scarcity are houses. There are only 36 houses in the game. If you build full houses on those 2 properties, you have now just taken up 24 of the 36 houses. 2/3 of the houses are now owned by you. If you buy a hotel, you put the houses back into the market, and now your competitors can put houses on their properties. But if you keep all of the houses, they can never flush out, they can never grow their income, and you will never have to worry because they're going to keep ending up in jail. They're going to roll the most highest numbers, 6, 7, or 8. 7 will put them on community chest, but a 6 or an 8 will put them on St. James or Tennessee, and boom, you're just going to sit there and bring in the money.
Oh my goodness.
And there's no other way for them to, they're stuck.
I am about to destroy my husband because I don't even like the game and they keep making me play it.
I know, we play, our kids love it. That's like our family.
Until the podcast runs and then it's over. So, because he sweetly listens. I'm going to destroy. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Listeners.
You're welcome.
You got the Hello Chaos advantage here out there in Monopoly land.
That's right. But we appreciate, Richard, you coming on with BlissPoint, and it's BlissPointConsult.com, correct? Is that
Correct.
Is that how people find
correct.
you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
But thank you.
And where do they find us?
You can find Hello Chaos Podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And we'd love for you to subscribe and comment and share. Just it helps boost our numbers, right, Richard? Is that right? We need that engagement.
Absolutely.
Well, and to know that we're giving back. That's a big. That's what we're doing here.
We want to listen too.
Yeah.
Like, give us commentary of,
Yeah.
I want to hear more of that, or
Yeah.
have you guys ever thought about having these type of guests on? So that commentary is greatly appreciated. But you can also find the podcast if you especially want to watch it.
Yeah.
If you want to watch instead of just listen, you can go to the parent media company, which is orangewip.com, or in our Innovate zines, which we've rolled out in the 3 South Carolina markets, which is gvlinnovates.com, chazinnovates.com,
Charleston,
and colainnovates.com.
Columbia.
And it's accessible content. It's just gated. We just need your name and email.
It's a little
but
thing.
it's free.
Yeah.
No paywalls.
Yeah.
And
Because we want to help. It's just
That's
giving
right.
back to entrepreneurs. Celebrating that spirit.
Celebrating the messiness, but also we're the first really dedicated voice, true voice for founders and entrepreneurs at a hyper-local level to help founders and entrepreneurs and innovators really understand how to navigate in their local spaces so that we can further their whether it's their startup or their grow or their scale journey.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Well said, Jenna.
Yeah.
No, JJ.
I know. I was like, I'm not Jenno. I could be Jenno. No.
Well, it's tough. It's tough.
I know. But thank you
Thank
much,
you so
Richard.
much, Richard.
Oh, my pleasure. It was a thrill and so much fun to have the conversation. Thanks for having me on the show.
Bye.
Bye.